Alright, so I am back in Unreal Engine 5 now. This is a project that I imported, or I shouldn't say imported, but converted from an Unreal Engine 4 project that had this wonderful asset pack in it. Obviously, you don't need to be using this specific pack. You can use any assets that you like for your scene. Obviously, that's going to be different from person to person anyways. I'm just going to be using this one since it's a really nice area and it looks really pretty. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the fundamentals and everything that you really need to know about using Sequencer before we get into the cinematic tools specifically. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go up to the Window tab here, if you haven't already, and we're going to find the Sequencer tab. So if we go to Cinematics here and go down at the bottom, we're going to see Sequencer. So we're just going to click on that, and I already have this open in a tab down here, and by default, this is going to be completely blank. What on earth? Well, that means we need to add a new sequence. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Cinematics tab right here. We're going to click on this and we're going to add a level sequence. And let's just make a new folder here. We can right click in our content browser and just say new folder. And I'm just going to call this Cinematics. We can just open this up here, this blank folder, and I'll just call this new shot. Why not? Something like that. And now that we've created this, it's going to automatically open this up in Sequencer, and now we're going to see our timeline and all this great animation-y stuff. So to use Sequencer, basically the way it works is you add objects to a specific sequence, and then you can edit a multitude of different values and parameters for these different objects to animate them, and it's really easy. So let's say I wanted to animate this palette right here. What I could do is I can just select this, and then up here in the world outliner, I can drag this right down here into this box on my sequence, and this will add it to the sequence, and this will allow me to start animating it. I can also delete this from my sequence by hitting backspace or delete. And there are also a few other ways that I can add this. So what I can do is if I have this selected, I can hit track, and then I can go add actor to sequence, and then add SMEN wood palette, and that'll add it as well. By doing that, you can actually select a whole bunch of stuff, all this stuff, and go track and add all 6 of these. Once again, you can delete them, or you can also just, without having anything selected, we can hit track, add to sequence, and then we can just scroll through or search for a specific object and add it to our sequence. So I'm just going to grab this, drag it on in, and by default we have this transform track. And so this is going to allow us to add keyframes for our location, rotation, and scale of this actor. So we can hit all these drop downs here. We can get really specific, animating the X location, Y location, roll, pitch, yaw, and the scale for all of our specific axes. And the way that we would add keyframes to these is very simple. As you can see, there's a new key button right here. So let's say I wanted to add a key for every single one of these values. I can go up to the this top transform section right here, and I can add a key to this entire section. Or if I didn't want to do that, Control Z to undo that. I could add keys for just the locations, for just the rotation section, or for just the scale section, or for any combination of these, right? But for now, I'm just going to key this entire thing, all of this. And then I'm going to go forward by, you can see maybe by 70 frames. Sure, I'll go forward 70 frames. That's about a little over 2 seconds there, since we're running at 30 frames per second, as you can see right here. And then what I could do is I could just move this up. I could rotate this, and I could scale this, and then I could hit a keyframe here on this entire section. And then if we scrub back, you'll see, wow, look at that. We've got an animated palette. This is glorious. All right, so we can hit play here, and that'll play through it. We can hit reverse here, and that'll reverse through it. And that is basically the fundamentals of Sequencer. You know, different objects are going to have different settings that can be edited. You know, if we have our object selected here, we can actually go over to the details panel and we can see every single property that can be edited. So if you see this little box with the plus icon, then that means that this value can be keyframed. And by pressing this, it'll add a sort of like an ability here. It'll add a track to our sequence here. And this will allow us to set, you know, whether this object is movable or stationary. And this just applies to basically like the lighting of the object. So this isn't anything too important, but you know, we can scroll through, we can add keys for whether or not we're simulating physics on the object, enable or disable gravity. We can pretty much animate any property for pretty much any object. And this allows us to create some really, really cool animations. All right, so now that we know generally how to add stuff to, so now that we know how to add stuff to our sequence and how to add keyframes, I'm just going to really quickly go over some of these other tabs here, because you might be wondering, what the heck are these? And you should be. So let's start going over these. So obviously we can save the current sequence, so we can do that. Why not just save that? We can find the viewed sequence asset in the content browser, which is pretty simple. We just hit that and then it'll bring us to the shot in our content browser. We also have create a new camera and set it as the current camera cut. Now this you might end up using when you start creating cutscenes, and I'll show you what this does. So basically, we can just take a camera angle. We can position ourselves somewhere. Let's say right here, and then we can press create new camera. And now we have just created a new camera, and in that exact location, this is a cinematic camera. So we've got all these different settings here. And we're going to get into these in a little bit. We're going to get into all these settings later on, but so it'll make a little bit more sense later. But I'm going to delete these from the track for now, since we don't really need those. And we've got a couple of more advanced things here. We've got actions, we've got view options, and we've got playback options as well, which you probably won't really need for probably quite a while, but they might be worth playing around with. We also have auto keying here, and we can select this, and then we can take our palette and we can just move this, and it'll automatically key the values that have been changed, as you can see here, which could definitely be useful if you're trying to animate something quickly, I guess. If you want to add something like that to your workflow, that could definitely be useful. And then we also have key snapping here, which is, we can snap it to specific frames, or we can disable it so that we can snap to basically any area on our sequence, as you can see here, versus with snapping on, which is where we just snap to specific keyframes. And then also we can edit the frame rate. So this is not going to adjust the actual playback. Obviously, if we play this animation, this palette is moving every single frame. It is being, this object is being moved every single frame. It's not just at 30 FPS. However, the track here is at 30 FPS. So basically, this just means that we can only add keyframes 30 times per second. The object is still moving at 60 or 100 or however fast your game is running, but we can adjust this also if we want to have more fine control. Like if you're doing some really high action, fast-paced scene and you want to have a lot of really fine control, you could animate your track at 240 frames per second. So as you can see, this still plays at the same rate, but we have much more granular control over how stuff happens. And then lastly, we have the curve editor, which you might not need anytime real soon, but this will open up a new tab here. And this is basically just going to allow you to edit all of the curves for your sequence. So this is getting a little bit more complicated, and we're not going to really probably be using this much at all in this course. But as you can see, like let's say I wanted to adjust the curve of the z-axis. As you can see, it it starts out kind of slow, and then it kind of ramps up here, and then it ramps up a bit more, and then it slowly declines. What we could do is we can select these keyframes here, and we can adjust the curve. So now it's going to go up more, or we can make it go up even more. And you can see at this point it goes down a little before going up. And we can adjust all this stuff here, as well as select various different sort of presets here. So we can select these to adjust how exactly these curves are going to act. We can also just grab the keyframes and basically just adjust the values here as if they're on a graph, as you can see. And it can definitely be useful when you're getting a little bit more advanced and are really starting to need that really granular control over everything that you're doing. So it's definitely useful to know about, so that when the time comes, you can start using this. All right, and then the last few things to know about Sequencer specifically are your start and end frames, which are pretty self-explanatory. Like in pretty much any video editing or anything like that, you can set the start and end point for your animation. So I'm just going to switch this back to 30 FPS so this snaps a little easier. So once again, this is something that we're going to get into a little bit more later. Not that there is much more to get into. It's pretty straightforward, but this is a feature that we will be using a little bit later on. And then we also have the cinematic viewport. So let's hop up here to the perspective tab and go down to the cinematic viewport. So let's just click on this, and as you'll see, we now have some extra buttons to play with. So we can actually scrub through our animation right here up in the viewport. We can also, play, pause. We can go to the next, previous, to front, all of this stuff. We can even set the playback start and playback end from right here in the viewport. And this is definitely going to come in handy when working with cinematics, because this will also allow us to view our animation from the point of view of our camera, so that we can get a better idea of what we're working with. Another thing I should mention real quick that I maybe should have mentioned earlier, but by pressing G on the keyboard, you can enable and disable game mode. And this is going to be very useful when we're viewing our cinematics and we want to get rid of all these pesky icons and movement widgets and outlines and stuff. If we really just want to view kind of the raw scene, we can just hit G, and that'll remove all of these random widgets and icons. So that's something to note. G to toggle game mode. All right, and that is basically all of the fundamental knowledge that you need to have about Sequencer. So in the next video, we're going to start getting into how to use the cinematic cameras and how to make everything look super, super awesome. We're going to start getting into all that, all the meat of this course. This is going to be pretty exciting. So let's hop right into that.